Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. Hopefully we get a little bit more folks trickling in. Again, if you didn't already know it by now, this is Prepping 101, Introduction to Prepping. And some of us here have a great deal of knowledge, and some of us not so much. Some of us feel overwhelmed right now with how do I get started? What do I need to focus on? And why? Why do we need to be prepared? Okay. So those are the kind of topics that we're going to talk about today. Pete over here is going to help me with the introduction. So Pete, go ahead and grab a chair and come over here. I'm going to give him some ample opportunities to talk as well. Pete and I, this is Peter Dupre, if nobody knows. I'm Michael Anderson. This is my wife, Wendy, over here. And we also have Dan Koskine and his wife, Wendy, that is going to take on the water portion of this prepping class. Penny McLaughlin back here has said that she would take care of the medical part of it. And she can explain a little bit about where she comes from. Again, we're not experts in any of our fields, but we do have a great bit of accumulated knowledge between us. I would venture to say between us we have at least 100 years of prepping.
That's 100 years of mistakes.
That too. Wendy and I, we traveled from the East Coast through Wyoming, stayed there for a little while, and now we're here. We've been here for a couple of years now, going on 3 years. My background is military, security, and that kind of thing. I've also worked in electronics with burglar alarm systems, fire alarm systems, and video surveillance and such, that kind of stuff. Wendy over here, she's a chemist, and not a lot of opportunity for chemists in this area, so she's kind of working out a field right now.
The kitchen is always a good field.
Anthony LaRue here is with us. He's visiting, and he's going to give some of his experience to the table as well, because we can all discuss and share our vast knowledge with each other. And that was the point of this, is to try to bring awareness to the community. Right now, I'm just going to start by, I'm going to go through a few historical events, because if it's one thing that I've learned about good presentations, is that you need a little bit of shock and awe involved. Okay? So let's get a little bit of perspective from a historical standpoint as to why we need to be prepared. Okay, why we need to develop a preparedness mindset. So I'm going to start off with the Carrington event. I don't know if any of you, some of you have heard of this, or you may not have. But it happened between September 1st and 2nd of 1859. And back then, they didn't have very much industrial, technological infrastructure back then. But they did have the telegraph, okay? A CME hit the Earth's magnetosphere and induced the largest geomagnetic storm on record. It caused serious damage to telegraph systems. A CME is a coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun blurts out a whole bunch of electromagnetic blah in our direction, okay? If it hits the Earth directly, it's bad. If it misses us, no big deal. And it happens. Sometimes, well, since then, it really hasn't hit as hard. Not enough to really do any damage, but we'll go on a little bit on that a little bit. A solar storm of this magnitude today would cause widespread electrical disruptions, blackouts, and damage due to extended outages of the electrical grid. The solar storm of 2012 was one of similar magnitude, but it passed Earth's orbit without striking the planet, missing us by 9 days. So that's the first thing that we narrowly avoided. When we get done with our little introduction here, we'll open the floor up for questions and answers, okay? So let me get through my monologue right now. Thank you. So we went on to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some of you may be remember that, who've been around for a little while. Also known as the October Crisis of 1962. It was a 1-month, 4-day confrontation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, which escalated into an international crisis when American deployments of missiles in Italy and Turkey were matched by Soviet deployments of similar ballistic missiles in Cuba. This was bad, and for some of you that may remember, there was a rush to build nuclear fallout shelters, bunkers. That's when a lot of this started. Okay? Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975 caused a lot of dissent, a lot of rioting, a lot of protesting. A huge movement of anti-government and anti-military sentiment. The energy crisis of the 1970s. Some of you may remember that. I was 5 years old in 1970, so I remember a little tiny bit, but I heard it was pretty bad. Evidently, this an oil embargo in 1973 was imposed on the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, which was otherwise known as OPEC, which led to fuel shortages and skyrocketing high prices at the gas pumps, and put a lot of hurting on people. And there were lines, if I remember, seeing on the news, going all the way down the block of people trying to get gas. So it was pretty bad. Y2K, the year 2000 problem, which was primarily negated through awareness leading up to December 1st, or 31st, 1999, and the preemptive actions of many computer programmers and IT experts. Then the US President Bill Clinton labeled Y2K as the first challenge of the 21st century successfully met. The total cost of the work done is estimated at over $451 billion in the United States. Wendy and I, we were married in 1996, and when Y2K came, all of the previous year, we were caught up in the frenzy. Many of you remember this. But I think that if it wasn't for the efforts of the IT professionals and those who, Microsoft even, who updated their software and everything, helped to mitigate some of the problems that could have arisen during 2000 in Y2K. So, could it have been really bad? It might have, but we had a whole year of, preventative measures put into place. So, going a little bit further here, the September 11th attacks, often referred to as 9/11, where a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks, who was actually behind these attacks is highly suspect and debatable. On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, at no other time had the U.S. on that day, since becoming a nuclear power, except during the Cuban Missile Crisis, been at DEFCON level 3, and a standby for possible increase to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 is the most severe level, and basically means an outbreak of nuclear war. DEFCON 5 being a normal state of readiness. U.S. military installations that day went to THREATCON Delta, the highest terrorist threat condition in the military. The military has been at THREATCON Bravo since 9/11. Before that, it was THREATCON Alpha. So we've always, since 9/11, have been militarily been at a state of terrorist readiness, heightened THREATCON. Hurricane Katrina. Who remembers Hurricane Katrina? So a lot of craziness happened there. In August of 2005, was a Category 5 hurricane that caused over 1,800 deaths and over $125 billion in damage in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, and the surrounding area. Katrina displaced more than 1 million people from the central Gulf Coast, becoming the largest diaspora in the history of the U.S. The great gun grab in the aftermath of Katrina is more than a cautionary tale. It's a stark reminder of what can happen when the authorities don't respect your gun rights. Instead of cracking down on the violent criminals forming militias and plundering the city, police targeted cities in what Tucker Carlson asserted was the most aggressive gun confiscation scheme in modern history. Then Superintendent Pt1 Compass made his point known at the time, no one will be able to be armed. This was during Katrina. The police followed up on his announcement and confiscated thousands of firearms illegally from law-abiding citizens with no due process. And I dare say that many of them have never gotten their firearms back. Hurricane Harvey in August of 2017 was a Category 4 hurricane that made landfall in Texas and Louisiana, causing catastrophic flooding and 100 deaths. It cost $125 billion estimated in damage. I'm sure it cost more. It's just that's what the government reports. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. We all know that very well.
I like that.
Which has to date created the foundation for another worldwide depression, along with rioting by socialist leftists, fraudulent elections, inflation, joblessness, food shortages, a Marxist presidential administration, massive supply shortages by manufacturers, a U.S. border crisis with Mexico, mandatory mask wearing and vaccinations, and an ineffective U.S. Supreme Court, cyber attacks, long-term negative effects on our distribution of goods and services, land and housing becoming unattainable, especially for those of us normal working people.
And don't forget the toilet paper.
Yes. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the wildfire season and drought upon us, which appears to be shaping up to be worse than in years past. Okay. There's a lot of theories behind why this is happening. I think all of us agree that things go in cycles, and this could very well be just one of those cycles. Are we at the beginning of it? Very well could be. So this year could be really, really, really rough, this wildfire season, and it may even be extended. I think last year, when it was smoky outside, I think it was in August. So we didn't really have much of a threat last year, but this year it's starting pretty darn early. It takes a community coming together now to survive. Strength in numbers. That's what preppers believe. That it takes a lot of people. There are lone wolves out there that think that they can go along and do it themselves, but I've done a lot of research and I understand that it takes people to come together, to link arms, like-minded people that care about one another and can learn how to pair together for what's coming. So that's one reason why we wanted to start this effort.
I'd like to make a comment. It's a really bleak list you just mentioned, and it could be very depressing, but I think what we need to remember in the bleakness of it is that I believe most people here probably are believers in the great Creator. And look at what He's done. He's brought perfect strangers together with like minds. We all have stories of how we got here. They're usually miraculous. So we need not fear. We just need to proceed in that confidence.
That's right.
We are prepared.
My wife and I have discussed this many times, and we believe that by being prepared and having faith in God, you don't get overwhelmed. You will be at peace, and you will be able to help others, because if you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of
It is a
others.
fight to stay in peace, though, because there's so much coming at us, but it is a good fight of our faith, and we are called to that.
Amen.
Yes.
The basics of prepping. I'm going to go through my list, and then I'm going to turn to Pete over here, because I know he has some other ideas. Every prepper in this room who's been doing it for a long time has a little bit different angle on some of the things that we really need to be focusing on. So my list is the basics of prepping for food, which include gardening, hunting, trapping, fishing, foraging, storage, canning, and food preservation. Wendy over here is going to be touching on that when we break loose, and she'll be talking a little bit more on the food end. Water. We have catchment systems, purification, and storage. And Dan and his wife Wendy are going to be talking about that over in that corner. Shelter. Energy alternatives, diesel, gas, solar generator, batteries, wind, fire, other things like that is really important, as well as clothing. Having an extra on hand, good quality quality and having good footwear. He's gonna cover that, at length. Clothing, well, haven't answered any questions if you have any at all. Medicine, build a med kit, trauma kit, know how to, use wild and medicinal herbs, how to find them, how to locate them, how to make use of them, and homeopathy and areas like that. Holistic medicine, things like that. Security and means of self-defense, and that encompasses basically your home and your perimeter, personal security. Communications, radio, got some radio equipment out here, CB, GMRS, FRS, amateur radio, ham, and also to have a plan. I think that's really, really important, especially today with these wildfires that we're facing. Have a plan. And that means either you're going to be jumping in your car and you have what you need in your car and you're going to go park somewhere for a few days and hang out until it blows over. Or if you have somebody in the church that will invite you over and you can stay a few nights with them and get out of your home if you have to. Or if you have a camper or an RV or something, you can go somewhere for a little while. But you have to have a plan. You don't want to wait until they come knocking on your door saying you got to go. And you haven't even really given it a whole lot of time. Because then you're going to end up scrambling. So that's why it's important to prepare for those kind of things. So you're going to bug in, you're going to stay in place, you're going to tough it out, or you're going to bug out, you're going to tech out. Or are you just trying to get back home? And we can touch on this a little bit too when we talk about Ps. Pete, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about some of the prepping terms that we have. To some of you who are not familiar with our terminology.
One of those terms is CRS, can't remember shit, but, where is it?
So yeah, we have a little bit of a language between us. He's got some handouts too, I believe.
We've got some sheet here of prepper terms, if anyone is not familiar with prepper terms.
I would like a copy of that if you.
All right, that'll be $3.
Any message to you?
Get it on there.
So my intent was not to scare you all when I read off all those things, but I just wanted to get your ears thinking that these things have happened in the past, so there's no reason why we should think that they're not going to happen here, either at the present or in the future. So, as preppers, the more you get into prepping, the more you become a student of history. And you start keeping your finger on the pulse of things a bit closer. You start analyzing things. You start doing what ifs. You start to think about what if this happens when I travel from point A to point B. Maybe I should be prepared for it if something does happen between here and here. What if that fire decides to change directions and now come my way? What am I going to do?
Been there, done that.
Yes,
Yeah.
Lost everything in 2015.
because I have been fortunate in that I have not had to face that in my life. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, we've got lots of terms. This is only a few of the terms that preppers use. Most of us are probably familiar with these. I mean, I describe what a prepper is. That's people like us who are getting ready for the future. One pair of glasses is enough. Prepping is the act of collecting and stocking emergency supplies. Preps are the things you buy. So if you buy extra canned tuna fish and you put them in your larder, those are preps. So if someone says, I've added so-and-so to my preps, that's what they mean. They bought something and added it to their stock. And then there's SHTF. I've only said the word once. I will say it again. It means shit hits the fan. Most of us are familiar with that expression. And that could be a scenario including an earthquake, a fire, civil unrest, other disaster, man-made or otherwise. Then there's Pt1, which is short for the end of the world as we know it. And that is a greater disaster of near biblical proportions. That
Some of us
changes-
pronounce it Pt1.
Yeah, that too.
Him.
Permanently changes everything. It's a world war, severe pandemic, no, not COVID,
Lucky.
alien invasion, EMP, zombies, no. Then we have EMP, which is kind of related to what we talked about earlier, which is the CMP. The coronal mass ejection, EMP is electromagnetic pulse, also comes from the sun. And it can also be man-made and come from a nuclear explosion. They put up, they release a nuclear bomb over Kansas. I think it's about 250 miles up or something. They could block out the electronics in almost 90% of North America.
I want to add that there has been a federal commission set up about a decade ago, but it's been since disbanded, that spent several years looking at this. And the results of this commission was that our infrastructure was severely not prepared for an EMP, and that billions of dollars needed to be put into hardening our infrastructure, which has not taken place. So it's a real thing.
Anyone familiar with the ABC reporter Ted Koppel? I mean, I'm not a big Ted Koppel fan, except for two things. He went to Iraq and was embedded with the troops of the first Iraq War. And the second thing is he's wrote a very interesting book about our power grid and what's wrong with it and why we're having problems with it. I don't know the name of it, but you can look him up.
Can
The
I
other-
say something about the EMP? I don't know if anybody else in here has heard, but I have heard with an EMP, if you have like a 1995 or older diesel, that there's a good chance it'll still work.
A lot of older cars will work.
Okay.
Non-computerized cars will almost certainly work. Maybe not because depending on the strength of the EMP,
Uh-huh.
but you could repair it with a wire or something.
Okay.
Cars with the computer chip, OBD1,
Uh-huh.
which comes from the late 80s and forward, if you burn out the computer with the EMP, unless you've got a spare one and a, what do you call it?
Faraday
Thank you. Faraday cage or to install, you're not going anywhere.
Okay.
And then there's something called a HEMP, which is a high altitude electromagnetic pulse, which is what I was talking about. They drop something up from the atmosphere. Then we've got bug out bags, which are basically like,
That is my get home bag.
Get home.
That is because if I'm only a few miles away, 5 miles, 10 miles, I don't need all that much stuff to get home. I just need water, you know, good shoes, and maybe a few energy bars or something like that, and I can walk home, no problem.
and you want that in case if you break down somewhere or you're stuck for some reason and you want to get to where your little bed is, that's why you have a little bag with stuff in it. Most women don't carry these, they carry something called a purse. I'm not quite familiar with it. My wife's purse has stuff in it that hasn't seen the light of day in 40 years, and she continually carries the stuff around.
This would be a good time to bring this up. I'm gonna interrupt you here for just a moment.
The go bag.
So this is the get out of Dodge bag right here. This is what they call a bug out bag, okay? You can integrate some of your get home bag stuff into your bigger bag if you need to get the heck out of Dodge and you're going, okay? And you're gonna probably be going on foot. You can throw this in the back of your car. There's a lot of stuff in it, so I keep this in my car at all times. I keep that in my car.
And right now with the fire danger, it's a good idea to have that.
Yep.
So that's
We'll go
listed
over
on
the
there
items in
too.
it later.
And we've got two other terms, bug in and bug out. And we talked about bugging out if you have to leave. Bugging in is to shelter in place and tough it out, but you have to be prepared for that at home, which means you need food and water and supplies put aside, and you need to make sure your windows lock and all the things that you need normally to live at home, but you want a little bit more of it. Then there's the EDC, which is short for everyday carry. And that's the stuff that a person carries with them on a daily basis to help them overcome everyday problems. From, you know, you could do a key ring, a wallet, a phone, a watch. I have a bunch of stuff over there on the table which kind of qualifies as EDC. I always have at least
Flashlights are good.
flashlight, a pocket knife. I always have that kind of stuff. I always have a pen and a piece of paper
Credit card.
or a debit card, but they don't always work.
I know, I just think so.
But I mean, you have all that stuff, but some of the stuff, I've got stuff on the table over there that shows kind of it. And your EDC is tailored to your own needs. If you're a guy that, or a gal that works on computers and only adjusts computer keyboards, you may want to have a couple of little tools in your EDC kit to work on the computer. If you're, a guy that's a backwoodsman, you may want a little knife that's got a built-in saw or something like that. So it just tailors to your needs, to your wants, your desires. Maybe your EDC would include a sewing kit because you want to be able to repair your clothes. Then we have grid down, and that means the power grid has stopped working and we have no power. And that could be coronal mass ejection, EMP, it could be a fire, a flood, an earthquake,
Cyber attack.
man-made event, war, explosion, anything. And the last one I have on the list, and there's plenty more, I just didn't want to overwhelm everybody. And that's the philosophy that I know Mike lives by, I know I live by, and I'm pretty sure Anthony lives by, and that is, and maybe even Dan. 2 is 1, 1 is none. Because if you've got 1 and it breaks, you've got nothing. If you've got 2 and 1 breaks, you've still got 1. And if you can do 3 is, even better, but try to have redundancy wherever possible in your important equipment.
And Pete, also, doesn't apply to electronics and guns and things like that. It also applies to food. So
It applies to everything,
yeah,
really.
Wendy will cover that on her food talk.
And I just got, thanks to Anthony's suggestion and Lance's, I took the hand test, I got my hand license. Mike's got his. And the first thing I did was buy 2 handheld ham radios because I didn't want to get stuck with only one just in case. And that's the kind of philosophy you have. You have a spare tire, but I also have an air pump in my truck. So I can pump it up in a can of Fix-A-Flat if I need spare and I have to repair something. So you're trying to think that way. And we're lucky here in Kamei because we live in a valley that, as the Nez Perce discovered when they first arrived here, it's full of food and resources. We have deer, we have occasional moose, there are bear, there are nasty things like mountain lions too, but we also have fish in the river. There is mullein, which you can use for a variety of purposes. There are other herbs and plants, and then there's, of course, I guess it was in the 40s or late 30s, they had a lot of apple orchards around here. There's fruit growing everywhere. I love it in the fall. I just take the dog for a walk along the river or in the woods, and I just pick fruit. And there's cherries, and there's plums, and there's apples, and there's blackberries and huckleberries. I mean, God made this a fortunate place and has allowed us to live here, and we share it with the Nez Perce people, and I am eternally grateful to them for letting us do that. So we have a lot of food, and we have a lot of resources here. We have wood, we have the ability to we have water. Even in a drought, the river hardly ever gets to the point where it's dry. It may have in ancient history, but even when we had dry weather a few years ago, there was still enough water in the river to feed the fish and to water us. And we have springs like up on Glenwood coming out of the hill, water just pours. And then of course most of us have our wells and things. So we have a lot of resources here, and we're lucky. And most of the people around here that I've talked to, whether they're in this meeting or in our group or anything else, they have a like mind. But other people do not. You'll hear the names that they call preppers. They think, one, we're paranoid. We're not paranoid. We're prepared. They think we're crazy. Well, that may be true, but my brothers think I'm crazy because I believe in this stuff, and I've been doing it since I was a kid. They'll call you paranoid, and then they think you want to start a militia. It's not about guns. Guns are important for protection and getting food, but you have to have some kind of way to protect yourself. But they will call you names. They'll think you're a nut job, a pessimist. I'm an optimist. And most of us are. If you believe in God, you're an optimist. If you don't believe in God, then you look at the bad side of everything. So
I think Murphy was an optimist as well.
yeah, I'm a card-carrying member of the Edward A. Murphy Society.
Yes, and he said that nothing can ever get so bad that it can't get worse. So.
There you go. So we have, people, outside your immediate sphere of like-minded people may accuse you of being a nut job, a wackadoo, paranoid.
Conspiracy theorist.
Conspiracy theory, another great one.
We say alternative theorists in our family.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you sound so crazy.
That's really what
So-
it
You're gonna get called names by people who aren't aware of what's going
is.
on.
That's it, they're not aware.
And I don't care they call me names. I don't care. I'm confident in my own skin, such as baggy and ugly as it is, it's me, and I'm confident there. I don't panic when things go bad. I get worried, sometimes I'm a little nervous, but I don't panic.
You know what, Pete, it's these people that are unaware and calling names that will be the first to knock on your door when.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I always put a little bit aside of extra on top of my normal food preps because I'd rather help my neighbor than shoot him. Well, most of them anyway.
We all
So,
have one.
yeah, there's always one, right? So, you know, we gotta think about getting along with people and helping people. We're a community, and I look at Kamei and the Kuski area as we have about 1,400 neighbors. And I try to meet as many as I can, and since I opened the prep store up there at Milepost 69 in Steve Major's Red Barn building, I've met even more people. And I worked at the local newspaper for about a year, and I met people doing that, and I did it on purpose because I lived here for 5 or 6 years and didn't know anybody. So I tried to meet more people. And prepping to me is just a way of life. You know, I have food put by. I have extra tools. I have, you know, like most people, I have at least one firearm. I'm not going to get into that. I don't discuss that with people, generally speaking, and I advise you, if you have any kind of guns and ammo, not to tell people what you have. For one, you never know who's listening, who may come and knock on your door and demand it, and other, you know, whether it be they government or individual. And the other thing is, you don't want people breaking in to steal your stuff. So I always say, don't discuss that. I never tell people how much food I have put by. I have plenty of food for myself and some to help my neighbors. But I don't say, gee, when the shit hits the fan, come on over to my house and steal my food. I'm not that kind of person. You know, I may help you, but don't try and take it from me without asking.
I want to add something to what you're saying. So when you go out and you do shopping and you're buying 2 instead of 1, and let's say you have a budget of $500, you're going to slam down and you're going to buy all kinds of stuff, right? Go to one store, get a little bit. Go to another store, get a little bit. You know, spread it out. Make it a little bit discreet so that you don't bring somebody's attention onto you.
But that hasn't been a big deal right now. You can go to Costco and Walmart and load up your carts, or you can go to Coninger's because things have been relatively stable. However, you come out of Walmart or a Costco with pallets full of stuff and put them in your truck when times are bad, someone's going to notice that, and they may follow you up Highway 12 and in some lonely stretch of the road push you off the road. You know, maybe even into the river. I mean, this is the reason why you want to spread the wealth with where you shop and kind of keep a low profile and stuff like that. That's, you know, my philosophy. And I know how to get by on, I have friends, I've been a journalist all my life, and I don't mean a news reporter. I write about camping, boating, hiking, automobile repair, that kind of stuff. But I've always been amazed because in the magazine business, you get laid off at the drop of a hat. If the circulation drops 1%, it's the editor's fault. If advertising goes down, it's the editor's fault. It doesn't make any difference. And the thing I used to know, I have friends in the business, I was doing it for 52 years. They're always amazed that when I'm laid off, I never seem to worry too much because I have food. I lived on a 28-foot sailboat for 12 years, and that's how I met my wife. The boat was always chock full of food. You know, I lift the bilge boards up and put varnished cans down there and shut the bilge boards so that if all else failed, there was food underneath my feet. And that's the way I think. You know, if I go for a ride in my truck and I'm going more than to downtown Kamei from my house, which is 3.5 miles, or Kuski, another 3.5 miles, I have a 2-quart military canteen behind the driver's seat full of water. If I'm going anything further than a few miles, I'll have a gallon of water plus the 2-quart canteen. I've got emergency blankets in my truck. I've got jumper cables, first aid kit. It goes on and on. And Mike's the same way, and I'm sure Anthony is. And I
Yeah,
always have a few
I'm
gold
gonna ask
bars.
Anthony a few questions here in a moment, but.
So this is the kind of thing that the way I think, it's a way of thinking and it's a way of life, and most of us, I think, in this room are like-minded. You know, we want to make sure we have food, we don't want to worry about it. And getting started is simple. Buy an extra can of beans or an extra can of tuna when you go to the store. It only costs you another 80 cents or $1. If you're living on $400 a month, Social Security, as I know some people do, and they get a little assistance, you can still afford to buy 1 can of tuna every time you have to buy groceries. I mean, you're not going to be buying expensive stuff, but beans and rice are cheap. Lentils are cheap, and they're nutritious, and they taste good too. Tuna, peanut butter, that kind of stuff. And that's Wendy's purview, but that's the kind of thing, it doesn't take much to get started.
We're starting to run out of time.
Anyway, I've got some handouts over there. There's the 7 tenets of prepping, and there is a 72-hour list of food for 3 days, which is the minimum you want to have put aside, at least 3 days. If you can build it up to 3 months, most things will blow over within 3 months, but not necessarily so, as Wendy will tell you. That's basically